And now your host on The Price is Right. And here he is, Bill Collins.
Please. Well, I do thank you, and we all thank you. Tonight we're starting a brand new sweepstakes.
I didn't agree with the choice. I recognize it, accept it, and we hope that it does not have an adverse effect.
The following program is brought to you in living color on NBC.
And now for the next 30 minutes, as the world turns.
Come to where the flavor is. Come to Marlboro Country.
This is Don Moorhen with Radio MYR, Radio 1410. I'm here on the Fort Myers side of the new Sanibel Causeway, which is about to open to traffic today.
And this is Charlie Dunlap along with Chuck McCord and Charlie Dickens. Cars begin lining up early this morning, and there's even a Cushman motor scooter. And I see a man with a home movie camera filming this historic moment.
Hello. I'm David Flory, and we're on Sanibel Island, Florida. The year-round population is under 7,000, but during the winter season, thousands of visitors and snowbirds come here. Well, because it's nothing at all like the rest of Florida. In fact, USA Today wrote of Sanibel as having a pre-Disney World, old Florida ambiance. But people who have been here for a long time say, yeah, Sanibel's great, but you should have seen it before the Causeway. Come on a journey with us as we take you back in time to a Sanibel most of us have heard of, but have never experienced. Rare 8mm movie clips will transport us all back to the early 40s, 50s, and 60s before the Causeway. By the way, this production would not have been possible without the works of one or two unknown filmmakers. Using a movie camera something like this, they left behind images of old Sanibel. Whoever you are, we thank you. When we first saw these vintage films, we kept asking, who is that? And what is that? To get the answers, we talked with 6 people who lived here before the Causeway.
I'm Charles LaBeouf. My wife and I and our young daughter moved here to the Sanibel Lighthouse. We lived in quarters 2 from 1958 until 1979.
My name is Bella Continus, and my husband's name is John Continus. Both John and I moved to Sanibel in 1957.
My name is Michael Billheimer. I'm a lifelong resident of Sanibel Island. I was born on May 20th of 1958.
Well, my name is Jim Pickens. My family vacationed on Sanibel and decided to move here, and in 1952, in the spring, my parents came down, purchased some property, and moved us, and I arrived on August 31st, 1952, on my 16th birthday.
My name is Deb McQuaid Gleason, and we moved to Sanibel in 1958, and I came with my mom, dad, my brother Mark, and my sister Judy.
My name is Bob Sabatino, otherwise known as Captain Bob Sabatino, as I was a fishing guide for 50 years on Sanibel Captiva. I came here in 1957.
And we came over on the ferry, and we thought that was wonderful. we got to go to town once a week on the ferry, and so that was a great day to look forward to. And that's when we did all of the important things like doctor's visits and taking the cat to the vet and all those sort of things.
I moved here because I had taken a position on what then was the Sanibel National Wildlife Refuge. It's since become the J.N. Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge. And back in 1958, this was headquarters for the refuge. So a condition of my employment was that I had to live in this beautiful spot.
John and I, along with his sister Mary Alec, we opened up the Coconut Grove restaurant, located on the corner of Periwinkle Way and Topham Bay Road. John was the gentleman that did actually build the building by himself, but he had other people helping him. There weren't too many restaurants on the island. There were probably about 3 or 4.
There's a potential that I might just know who some of these unknown filmmakers are. For instance, there was a man named Hadwin Starbuck that would come down here during the winter months and show movies at the community house and at the Black School and at South Seas Plantation and at, I think, both Causeway and Island Inn.
I remember the very early years before the Causeway, riding on the car ferry with my father and mother, making our weekly or bi-weekly trip to Fort Myers to get supplies and groceries. I remember it was a real adventure. I remember coming down to the ferry landing here at the east end of Sanibel and waiting for the ferry, which seemed like a huge ship to me at that age.
So when I came to the island, I could not believe this place. We went down to the beach one day and I could look either way, as far as you could see, not a person on the beach. All the beaches I was ever at were just swamped with people. And here we had this bare beach, nobody around. The funny thing is, most all the roads on Sanibel were dirt roads. You know, there were sections of paved roads, but the majority of the roads were dirt roads.
This is the old Sanibel School. This is really symbolic of the simple life before the Causeway. Here's a good overview of Sanibel, the way we were.
That reminds me of Ralph Woodring's mom, Esperanza, who lived down at Woodring Point. And the way she lived was pretty much like the old homesteaders had lived. She had chickens and goats, and anytime you drove by, you had to be careful not to hit one of those chickens or one of those goats, because they wandered wherever they wanted to go down there on Woodring Point. And that are the bulkheads that used to be out in front of Causeway that they used for shoreline control. I don't know that it helped much, but they were very, and that's Gulf Drive that used to just run right down the beach until they moved Gulf Drive back behind all the buildings.
Trying to find a job here back in those days, forget it. I mean, I went all over the place because I wanted to live here. And I just happened to go to Nave's Plumbing on Sanibel. And I asked them for a job. And they said, no, we don't really need anybody. But just as I was walking away, Goldie Nave said, hey, maybe Dale Ballinger up on Captiva can use the help. Because Dale Ballinger lived on Captiva, and he did a lot of the plumbing for them on Captiva and Sanibel. So anyway, he said, yeah, he could probably use a helper. He's doing it by himself. So they hired me. And I moved on the island right then.
Of course, when we relocated here, we were carried across San Carlos Bay by a ferry. This was 5 years before the Causeway was built, and it was a different lifestyle for us. We drank primarily rainwater that fell out of the sky onto the roofs and into cisterns. We had no telephones because private phones weren't available on the island. We had one television station in Fort Myers. But all in all, it was something that we soon learned to cope with, and we got set into the island lifestyle very quickly.
There weren't that many places to rent on Sanibel. I found this man named Henry Rhodes, and Henry Rhodes graded the roads on Sanibel Captiva. He would start at one end of Sanibel, grade take the washboard off, flatten it out. And that was his job from the county. And he used that grader as his personal car. I mean, every time he went somewhere, he was in the grader, whether he was grading or not. And it just so happened that he built 2 Jim Walter homes. Now, a Jim Walter home is a shell of a home. In other words, they build the house unfinished. It's just the shell, the roof, and the walls. You finish the inside, right? So anyway, when I heard about that, I went over and I asked him. He said, well, both my sons are in the service right now, so I can rent one of them to you, And we made a deal that instead of rent, I would finish the inside. I would put walls up and a ceiling,
The one-room schoolhouse had one teacher, and there must have been about 20 children, but different ages when they were going to school. And I was quite concerned about that, not having a school. However, they did manage very nicely and accepted the way it is.
But anyway, he had an outhouse. There was an outhouse in the back of the house. And that was the bathroom. The water system was a hand pump in the sink, and you got all the water you needed from the hand pump. The only problem was it was sulfur water. Sulfur water smells like rotten eggs. I mean, the odor is bad,
Living on Sanibel was a wonderful thing for young children because they had no boundaries. We would get on our bikes and we would ride from here to Captiva, or we would ride to any beach, or we would just go anywhere we wanted. There were no restrictions on us.
Well, I came here, I was midway through high school, started my junior year at Fort Myers Senior High School. There were about 14 or 15 of us at that time, depending upon who was coming and who was going, that went over to high school, including both islands. We would take a boat, left the Old Bailey's dock about 6 o'clock in the morning, went to Ponderosa, where we would catch a school bus. School bus would pick us up a little bit before 7 o'clock.
In fact, when I first came to the island at Dewey Miller's place, the fish camp, Dewey had a house right there at the fish camp. And when we drove up from Miami, I had no air conditioner in the car back then. So I was kind of hot and sweaty, even from changing the tire on the, on Tamiami Trail. So Mary, Dewey's wife, asked me if I wanted to take a shower. So I said, oh yeah, that'd be great. But I didn't realize what she was talking about. She was talking about what looked like an outhouse on the side of the building with just a pipe coming out. And you turned one faucet on, and it was just cold water. There was no heat, right? It was cold water, and it was sulfur water. So now I stunk worse than I did before I took a shower. I needed a shower from the shower. Not only that, but the mosquitoes were so bad that you were swatting mosquitoes while you were taking this so-called shower. I mean, it was ridiculous.
This is Ferry Landing. Before 1963, this was the biggest intersection on Sanibel. Life was simple then. If you wanted to come to Sanibel, most people took the ferry. Let's take a look at some old footage.
Now this looks like the Islander. I can't see the writing on it, but it looks like the Islander. It was a wooden hull vessel. And of course, by the cars coming across, you can tell that it's way before 1958. Yep. Most island cars the rocker panels were rusted out and fender wells, because at times we'd have spring tides and wind-blown tides that would flood some of the roads, especially the roads coming in here to the lighthouse. And we were constantly driving through water that was basically seawater. This looks like the best. It doesn't have the superstructure on it. That could be Captain Leon Crumpler, but I'm not positive. He was the head captain for Kinsey. The round trip on the ferry for my family was $4. And of course, when the first causeway was built, the toll was $3, so we were actually saving money. There's Bailey's store on the bay. The Sanibel ferry landing. That looked like a shot of the mailboat mixed in with the ferries, but I'm not sure. I don't know what this is. This is just a pleasure boat, apparently.
And it was always a lot of fun, and my father would take me up into the pilot house to see the captain and to talk with him on the trip over. And I think that may have ignited my love of water and boats from a very early age, because that's been one of my greatest loves here living on Sanibel Island.
I recall the time when I drive the children down to the ferry, and it was time for all the children to get on the ferry to head for Fort Myers to go to the school there. and all the children. It was really a joy to watch them as they were going across the bay. They were feeding the birds. They all had bread or cookies, and it was very, very exciting, and I think those are wonderful memories that the children will always remember.
But a funny thing happened. When we got to the ferry landing, you know, and the cars were lined up on each side, when I drove up, just as I drove up, they were loading the ferry, but they were loading it with some people first, then the cars. And now the people in the cars waved me. I was the last one there, but they waved me first. I said, geez, what nice people. You know, waving me. Wow, didn't even have to wait. And they only have like 5 or 6 cars on the ferry. You know, so I knew some of those cars weren't going to get on. Well, after we went across, I realized why they waved me on first. The waves, the salt water was coming over the bow of the ferry and it was going onto the car. Now, there wasn't a car on Sanibel that wasn't a rust bucket from traveling that car, you know, on the ferry. I mean, every car on the island had rust on it.
We're here at the Bailey Homestead, the home of one of the founding families of Sanibel. Let's go back 50 or 60 years ago and see some film of the early construction on Sanibel.
Then, we didn't have off. You didn't have spray, you know. What you used was citronella oil. Now, when it's hot and clammy, and you got this oil all over your face and all over your hands, it's about as uncomfortable as you can imagine.
I think that steel beam that those men are carrying there may well be when we opened up the porches on the community house. This would have been, I think, summer of 1953. We needed more room. The population was growing. We were doing more things at the community house. They were having square dances on Saturday night, as an example. And they decided to widen it by opening up both porches on the back, or making both porches front and back be part of the central part of that. And to support the roof across there, they had to put steel beams in. I may well have been one of those that was carrying that beam in to the community house when that project was underway. The bridge we're looking at in this picture is really the second bridge that ran over to Captiva.
That's the Blind Pass Bridge. It was a very narrow bridge. In fact, way back then, there were only 2 cars on the island, and they actually had a wreck on that bridge. 2 cars, and they crashed on the bridge. Right? And then I think it was 1955, they eliminated that bridge. And what you see here is the new bridge that they built in, I think it was 1955.
Bailey's store was down on Bailey Road. So he was at the other end of the island, close to the bridge, where the bridge was going to be constructed at the time. And my husband kind of convinced him, look, you're going to be in a perfect spot on the corner right here, Periwinkle Way and Tarpon Bay Road. We did the building, and he rented from us. A number of years later, he decided he wanted to buy it, and we sold it to him. And my husband put the first movie also, the movie theater, there on Sanibel.
Hundreds of cars pass by here each day, and most people pretty much overlook the street sign, Airport Way. Back before the Causeway, we did have an airport on Sanibel, and thanks to our unknown filmmakers, we have some great footage of the airport and some fantastic views from the sky.
That's Dick Kearns. His parents owned Hurricane House cottages on the Gulf side, and I think at the time this was taken at the airport, it was over at Causeway, as I said, and I think Dick worked at Causeway. A seaplane. We had a seaplane assigned to the refuge. It wasn't this one. And my second trip to Sanibel in '56, I came by government seaplane. Here's a shot of the lighthouse, the old Coast Guard observation tower on the right, the tide up underneath the buildings. This is the mouth of the Sanibel River discharging into the Gulf during the end of the rainy season. This is primarily the Sanibel Slough. It's a great shot. This is Causeway with the water tower. All these little cottages, complexes along the beach.
By these pictures here, you can see how sparse the island was back then. You know, in 1960, when Hurricane Donna came, they had a census of the island. And on both islands, the population, including Captiva, Sanibel, 435 people.
This is the Bailey Tract. When the development first started, the dikes were being put in, the white sand. This is Tarpon Bay Road, and that little road that runs off to the left goes into the Bailey Tract. That could have been Island Inn right there. It went by fairly quick. And here's the airport. It was 2,800 feet long, and it stayed in operation until 1978 when a condo was built at the west end of it, and FAA was concerned that it was in the way, so they closed the airport. It's now where Butterknife, I believe, is the subdivision that's located on the airport land.
Sanibel's first modern gas station was opened by Francis and Sam Bailey. Here's the grand opening with the Bailey brothers and their wives, Pauline and Cookie. A good time was had by all.
Pauline Bailey was Francis's first wife, who died unfortunately in the 60s. And Sam and Cookie.
Notice how little there is along the roads as you're looking east on Periwinkle Way. That's at the intersection with Bailey Road and Beach Road. It's about a block west of where the current Causeway crosses, and if you look towards the east, there's nothing. Oh, that's Ruth Rutland. Now, you have to understand about Ruth Rutland. She was married to Clarence Rutland, who was one of the pioneers here on the island. She was also a sister to the Wiles brothers that were here on the island. One of her brothers, Tim, or TM, had the Timmy's Nook on Captiva. And when we were growing up, she was Aunt Ruth because she was the aunt to some one of the kids that was in our group. Everybody was kind of related to everybody. So you were just always, you would say, if you met somebody, you would say, "Hi, Uncle Arthur," or "Hi, Aunt Ruth," even if they weren't kin to you, just to make sure that they weren't.
The Ding Darling Refuge is over 5,000 acres of protected land with thousands of visitors annually. Here's what it looked like when it was the Sanibel National Wildlife Refuge.
Here's one of the early refuge signs. This is Tommy Wood, the refuge manager, getting into the Jeep. He was my boss. I was the second employee. Here he is driving through the Spartina Grath, and that's a surplus military Jeep. When I arrived here, that was my vehicle to use. is one of the alligators in the Bailey Tract. This is a great shot of the early wetlands. I really enjoyed seeing this. All of the open Spartina marsh, the birds. This is probably somewhere in around 1952, I would judge. The alligator again. Is a hermit crab and a sea urchin. Birds on a sandbar. I don't know just where that was taken. Could be out in Tarpon Bay, but it's hard to say. The Australian pines are just getting a foothold on the island when this was taken.
When I was working for the Fish and Wildlife Service, the lighthouse was our headquarters. I only worked there part-time because I was still guiding, and they only needed a part-time worker, and I fit in perfectly because I would work when I wasn't fishing. I would work there. So it worked out for both of us. The great thing about it was that even though I was part-time, they supplied all my clothes. I mean, I had a clothing allotment. I mean, I had beautiful jackets, winter jackets, pants, shirts, wildlife shirts. One of the jobs that Charles and I had was relocating, or trying to relocate, alligators from the backyards of people, you know, in the canals. Unfortunately, a lot of people would feed them. They loved marshmallows, and for some reason the people would do that. But then one day, these newcomers had a cocktail party, inviting all the neighbors to meet them, and they had been feeding the alligators marshmallows. And what they were doing was, they were making little trails up, almost up to their house, of marshmallows. And the alligator would come up, scoop up marshmallow, scoop up a marshmallow, and we had to go down and relocate this alligator. Whenever we tried to relocate an alligator, we painted a white number on its head. And I remember that one distinctly as being 12. We took it to the sanctuary, released it. In 2 days we got a call. We got an alligator here with the number 12 on his head. I said, where are you located? You came and got the one alligator. They didn't know it was the same one. I said, so we went back and we got it.
Just Another Day in Paradise. That sounds like a good title for this next segment. Roll 'em.
This raccoon is that was taken here at the lighthouse. When I moved here, there were 2 water towers between the buildings, and one of them fed gravity feed to our toilets, and the other originally was used for gravity-fed drinking water. And I think this is Esperanza's, the goat. I don't know anyone else that had a goat, and I don't know. That's probably at Jack's place, but when we arrived here, I don't believe there was any drive-in per se.
If you want to know about fishing on Sanibel before the Causeway, you ask someone who was a fishing guide for 50 years. Here's Captain Bob.
Okay, the nets you see there are called seines, and that's a net that you walk out and you surround your bait fish, and they could be 100 feet long, you know, and that's how we used to get bait, white bait. Now I watched that guy cast, and I can tell you right now, he doesn't know how to fish. I can tell you right, the way he used that rod, in 2 seconds, I can tell you, he doesn't know what he's doing.
This, I think, is at the tip of Woodring Point. That's Tommy Wood's house.
Yeah, that's Jake Stokes, sure enough. That's his boat right there. And not only that, but you know, when the ferry landings were obliterated from Hurricane Donna, he was one of the boats that transferred people back and forth to the island. Now this guy has a decent sized fish on, and I can tell by the way he's reeling, he's having a tough time. Not only that, but when we see the fish, it's a big grouper. That's what it is. It's a good sized grouper.
This is the old Sanibel post office. You might ask, how did the mail get from the mainland to here? Why, it came by the mailboat. Let's take a look.
That was the post office down by the ferry landing. And that's Scotia Bryant.
She was the postmistress when I arrived here, and here comes the Santiva, the mailboat. This was operated by I believe the Singleton or Singletary brothers. That's Pat Murphy. Pat was the rural mail carrier. He was married to Priscilla Murphy, who was one of the early realtors on the island. That's Priscilla. That's Pat.
Now there's Periwinkle Way. Now you see the traffic jams on that road right now? My God, there's one car.
There are some people that actually traveled on the mailboat to go to school or go to Fort Myers to go to the doctors or whatever. You'd have to find a place to spend the night when you were in town, but that's how some people just got to downtown Fort Myers.
Long before the Causeway was built, the Sanibel Packing Company was the forerunner of Bailey's General Store. Today, Sanibel has a thriving business community, but before the Causeway, things were a little simpler. Take a look.
I believe that delivery truck that we're looking at there was the Bailey truck that they had for years and years at the store.
Of course, the Sanibel Packing Company, Bailey's store.
This is Bailey's General Store at the original location, which was on Bailey Road. And that was the only grocery store on Sanibel, needless to say.
J.P. Carter Company. They were that's Ken Copper in the foreground. Dick Kearns. And it looks as though Ken he worked for J.P. Carter Company at the time, and he was delivering whiskey to the Causeway liquor store.
As you can see, the amount of bottled water that was being delivered. That's because most all the water on both islands was sulfur water. Mitchell Castaways was a place that Dean Mitchell got my wife, her grandmother, and her sister to run the restaurant, the Castaways restaurant there. And I worked with them in the restaurant.
Douglas Chambers Real Estate was the real estate company Priscilla worked for, and I believe this building is her house on Periwinkle. Casa Bar, package store.
This is Causeway, one of Sanibel's oldest hotels, established in 1890. Let's take a look at their famous evening buffet.
Your narrator calls it Causeway. Islanders always just called it Causeway. The Y was silent. That's Jack Rushworth in the center. Jack's still alive. He's a volunteer at Ding Darling. Blowing the conch horn, letting know it's time for the buffet. I think these are mostly winter people that are staying here for the winter.
The Causeway was the main society place, really. Howard Dayton and his wife ran that place, and that's where they had dining, and because it was a hotel, and there weren't very many hotels at that time.
New York and Paris have long been the fashion centers of the world. Well, Sanibel had its own fashion show in the late 1950s. What merriment, what fun.
Oh, I love the hat. That's Finetta Stalin, for sure. She was a wonderful woman. Oh, I know that face, but I don't know the name. That's Jean Jack. Her husband was Jimmy Jack. This was probably a fundraiser for the Episcopal Church. Oh, that's Mary Bell. It's Finetta again. That could be Milbury, Rushworth. Bell again.
Sanibel is world famous for its shelling. Here's what it was like before the Causeway.
This is the beach out in front of Causeway. The groins give that away. And there's the shells heaped up on the beach during a great shelling expedition. Shells were sometimes fantastic, and all the result of bad weather. We had strong northwest winds that blew long enough, then this beach would be covered with hundreds of different species of shells.
This is what I try to tell people who think about the shelling today. Back in the 50s, Well, I don't know before the 50s, but I came here the late 50s and through the 60s. And in all that time, you could go to the beach and see a pile of shells. You didn't have to walk the beach like you do today to find shells. You could walk to one spot and just dig through this one spot all day, and you would find beautiful shells. Yeah? I mean, they were, especially during the winter time when the full moon and the low tides and everything, high tides would bring all these shells in. And they were good shells. I mean, there were a lot of live ones mixed in, but they were nice shells.
There's the way to shell on that sunbonnet. That could have been taken in the 1880s.
Wildfires on Sanibel in 1955 convinced Lee County to consider building a bridge to improve access to the island for firefighters. Now, Sanibel has full-time firefighters and modern equipment. Back then, in those pre-Causeway days, well, take a look.
This looks like Tarpon Bay Road. And that could be a fire in the Bailey tract. Yeah, the fire department were great at putting out fires, but I know that guy right there. That's Bill Shannon from Captiva, I believe. He's got a limp. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's Bill Shannon. They put all these fires out, and that really had a negative impact on the slough. It allowed undesirable plants to grow. Had the marsh been allowed to burn completely, we wouldn't have had all this this early success of plants like Brazilian pepper that we've spent thousands of dollars in recent years to eradicate.
Whenever I see a fire truck, even today, I'm always reminded of the old Captiva fire truck and the role it played in my life. The fire truck was one of the main reasons I survived on Captiva. That fire truck bought me a house, and right on the corner was this old Florida-style house. And it almost seemed like it was calling me. One day, I came walking around the corner, and Paul Everett, the guy that owned that house, nailing a for sale sign on it. He said, well, let me tell you something. Shannon Real Estate, if I go through them, they want $17,500, but I'll take $13,000. You think you can come up with $13,000? And I tell Paul, I can't do it. They won't give me a loan. I don't make enough money. And this is what he says. I'll finance it myself. You don't have to worry about paying me every month. So long as you can come up with $1,300 at the end of the year, by that time, the house is yours. I said, that's fantastic. So I go home and I tell Sue, my wife, I said, we can have the house and I don't have to pay. She says, you're crazy, you can't afford that. We can hardly afford the $50 a month we're paying for this place. And you're gonna put us in hock for, I said, let me put it this way, honey. We'll have a house for a year. We'll be rent-free for a year. And a guy named Ray Booth, who's with the fire district on Sanibel, on Captiva. But they needed somebody to take care of the fire truck. So the job was this. I would take care of the fire truck every Saturday, blow the siren, test the siren out at 12 o'clock, call in the county on the civil defense radio, crank up the generator, make sure it was running, and drive the fire truck every Saturday to keep the gas fresh. That was it. Once a week. How much do you think that's worth? And I said, geez, I don't know. How about $100 a month? I said, $100 a month? the first thing I thought of, that's a house payment. I said, sure, I'll do it. A few hours every Saturday. It's not going to interfere with my guiding, right? I had the job for over 13 years. It paid for the house. I had the house free and clear, right? Now this happened a week after I signed the papers for Paul Everett for the house. 1 week. That's how fast it happened. I mean, there was no problem. We had the house. I had a house. My dream house. I loved it. I loved it.
After the 1955 wildfires, more people were talking about building a bridge to connect Sanibel to the mainland, but not everyone was in favor of it. Let's look at this 2008 interview with Francis Bailey, who played a big part in Sanibel's heritage.
But you know, the funny thing is about the Causeway, sometimes we don't realize what we've got. And some of us, I don't know about me in particular, but a lot of people wanted the bridge. We wanted things like that. Now we got them, wish the hell we get rid of them. You know, so all of what we wish as people, when we get it, it's not it.
Many of the people on the island, not all of them, were anti-bridge. So we went to Bailey's store on a daily or a weekly basis on the bay to buy groceries, and we could see the bridge progressively coming across the bay. And it gave employment to some of the islanders back in those days, which was a good thing. But until the bitter end, most of us that were opposed to the island, we stood our ground. And I should add that many of the pro-Causeway people that wanted the bridge for economic reasons, property values, within a few years after the Causeway came in, they had it with the number of people that were coming here, and they all sold out and left. When we arrived on the island, there were about 400 people, I'd guesstimate, living on the island, and before long we knew just about everyone. And it was just a great life until 1963, when the Lee County Commission decided to get access to our tax base and build a bridge.
I hope you have enjoyed this journey back to Sanibel before the Causeway. Now it's time to go back to the 21st century.